Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be sharing my time with the honourable member from... Bear with me for 1 second. I have my chart upside down here. Honourable member from Vaughan Woodbridge. Mr. Speaker, thank you to the honourable member for Carleton for bringing his motion. I welcome this opportunity to speak to an issue that is a key part of our government's plan to make Canada a leader in the clean growth economy. Mr. Speaker, listening to the Conservatives talk about pricing carbon reminds me of those old Maytag commercials. You remember the ones, some poor Maytag repairman would be sitting, looking bored, waiting for the phone to ring. He's lonely. Nobody's calling him. The world is marching on without him, and he can't seem to figure out what to do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the world is moving on, and it's time for the Conservatives to catch up, to take their heads out of the sand, to recognize that acting as they did for 10 years under the previous government is simply not good enough. It is time to realize that 1, scare tactics are wrong, 2, that climate change is real, 3, that the science is settled, and 4, that around the globe, countries are taking important steps to address it. An appeal to fear is a fallacy that underpins the entire motion before us today. In fact, the Conservatives find themselves in an increasingly shrinking island of denial. While they spend their days yelling the sky is falling over carbon pricing, the world is moving decisively and optimistically towards action. Indeed, in 2017, there were 42 countries and 25 subnational jurisdictions pricing carbon. In fact, the number of carbon pricing initiatives implemented or scheduled has almost doubled over just the past 5 years. Among those pricing or planning on pricing carbon are the European Union, China, the Republic of Korea, Singapore, Colombia, California, and of course Canada's 4 largest provinces, British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, representing more than 80% of our country's population, have all adopted carbon pricing. I mentioned that China is one of the countries pricing carbon. It's already tested a cap-and-trade system in 9 of its provinces, 7 since 2014, and 2 more added in the past 2 years. The plan will soon go national there, effectively doubling the world's priced carbon. When that happens, Mr. Speaker, fully 1/4 of the world's carbon pollution will be priced at one level or another. 1/4. Now, why is it, Mr. Speaker? The leaders of those jurisdictions care about jobs. They read the debates on both sides. They know how devastating business as usual would be, and they are taking market-based approaches to effect meaningful change. Mr. Speaker, governments around the world understand something that the Conservatives don't seem to grasp: basic economics. Let me explain for the benefit of my friends in Her Majesty's loyal opposition. In economics, the law of supply and demand dictates the relationship between supply, price, and demand. If you want to encourage a certain type of activity, you can provide a financial incentive for doing so, and if you want to discourage a certain type of activity, such as polluting, you can create a financial disincentive. It's really not that hard, Mr. Speaker. It's how free markets work. It's good public policy, and it takes economics into account. By sending clear market signals, the genius of the private sector is unleashed to find creative and innovative ways to meet market needs for things like home heating and groceries at the lowest price, while at the same time pricing pollution. Unless we price pollution, the laws of demand cannot be unleashed to reduce it. That's exactly what our government is doing with carbon pricing. We're harnessing the power of market forces to tackle greenhouse gas emissions. This will spur innovation and improve our competitiveness. It encourages companies to look for better ways of doing things, including using different sources of energy, using less energy overall, or converting the pollution into useful or sequestered forms. Mr. Speaker, using less energy overall is critical. According to the International Energy Agency, we could get half the way to our Paris commitments just by being more energy efficient. That's why, together with most provinces and territories, as well as Indigenous groups, we adopted the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, which includes carbon pricing. The private sector understands the benefits of pricing carbon. In fact, they've been asking governments to put a price on carbon for years. because they want certainty about the ground rules. They want to know what will be expected of them, and they want a level playing field during the transition to a low-carbon economy. They also know that carbon pricing is the best, most efficient way of achieving the desired public policy objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and saving our planet. And that's why the companies themselves are adopting carbon pricing. In fact, as of November 2017, 1,389 companies had disclosed implementing or that they were implementing or planning to implement internal carbon pricing to the Climate Disclosure Project. 1,389, up from just 154 years ago. So the Conservatives better add multinational corporations to the list of folks who just won't get behind their politics of fear. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, global momentum for carbon pricing is building in national governments, states and provinces, in the private sector, and Canada will move with them. We're also seeing in international organizations such as the United Nations. Its global compact calls on companies to set internal price at a minimum of $100 per metric ton over time and invites companies to become carbon pricing champions by aligning with the business leadership criteria on carbon pricing. That criteria is designed, and I quote, to inspire companies to reach the next level of climate performance and to advocate for a price on carbon as a necessary and effective measure to tackle the climate change challenge. Under this initiative, companies set an internal carbon price, advocate for responsible policy, and report on their progress. And there's yet another group calling for carbon pricing, the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, which has joined with the World Bank to bring together leaders from across government, the private sector, and civil society to share experience working with carbon pricing and to expand the evidence base. So you can see, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition finds itself increasingly out of step, increasingly out of touch, increasingly alone. The fact is that when Canadians give climate change serious thought, it is obvious to them that pricing carbon has to be part of the solution. That consensus has been in place for quite a while. Our government is part of that consensus. We know that pricing carbon sends the right signals to the markets, that companies respond by becoming more innovative and energy efficient, and that by doing both, they become more competitive. Mr. Speaker, it was the French novelist Victor Hugo who wrote, "You can resist an invading army, you cannot resist an idea whose time has come." Carbon pricing's time has come. It is time for the Conservatives to help Canadians join the international effort to fight climate change. Her Majesty's loyal opposition undoubtedly has constructive suggestions. I wait for them to pull their heads out of the sand to share them with us. And on this point, I will say that carbon pricing is only one part of the solution. Government has to take a varied approach and come at this problem from different angles. We're not proposing that the entire reduction in CO2 emissions will come from the price and the market effects of the price. We're proposing things like a greening government solution. We are proposing efforts to reduce methane gas emissions from the oil sands. We're working with the provinces to improve infrastructure that will drive the green economy. We're investing in innovation across the country in different superclusters and whatnot to ensure that there's an opportunity for Canadian companies to generate the technology, the patents, the know-how to engage in the clean climate future. It's not merely about defending the status quo. It's about moving forward and being part of a global solution to tackle a global problem. Canada has the intelligence, the ability, the infrastructure, the smart, young, driven people who want to be part of positive change, to be part of the solution. And I appreciate members opposite in their previous remarks who may have said that we can't move without the United States, but in fact the United States is moving. The 1,389 companies I mentioned include American companies. And Americans are taking steps to reduce their overall carbon demand with companies like Tesla and Solar City and others who make their patents freely available to the world so that the world can reduce its carbon footprint. This doesn't happen alone. The Government of Canada is not suggesting that it will. But we are suggesting that if we're going to make change, we should do it right. We should do it in a way that includes market forces, and we should not just leave it to the 50% of top emitters, as the previous member mentioned. We should include all Canadians by adopting a price on carbon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my friend for his remarks. I had the pleasure of being in St. John quite recently, and great to see strong opposition to the carbon tax, even despite, I know, the member's best efforts to solve the policy. His speech, with all due respect, was embedded in this sort of bad metaphor and presumption that, well, an idea's time has come, therefore it has come. Of course, there are many instances in history when we could point to a situation where people may have thought that an idea's time had come when it turned out to not be such a good idea, and there was a better idea in the offing. In particular, when it comes to the carbon tax, I'll say to my friend, because I know, and the member for St. John Rothsay as well has spoken about issues of poverty that exist within his community, and indeed certainly they exist across the country. Why is the government intent on using the stick instead of the carrot when it comes to responding to climate change? Why do they want to hit people with the stick of higher taxes who, in many cases, can't afford to make different kinds of choices? They're simply not able to go through the process of replacement, substitution. Why don't they instead do things like we did, like the home renovation tax credit, policies we undertook, like regulatory changes affecting heavy emitters? We can do this a different way that doesn't hurt struggling people in his riding and elsewhere. Is he not open to alternatives to the all-stick, no-carrot approach?
That's a good question.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan for his comment, but in fact, he actually highlights the very issue here in that we are using carrots, we are taking a multifaceted approach. One of those facets has to be and must be a price on carbon. Most Canadians understand the tragedy of the commons. They've seen the Lorax movie. They understand that if there's a common resource without a price or a cost, it will be exploited to no end by the population without fear of the consequences. But when you put a price on the very pollution, the very thing that we're trying to reduce, the law of demand dictates that as the price of that entity goes up, the demand for it will go down, and people in their daily lives, in their shopping choices, in their decision on where and how to drive, on the type of technology, the amount of insulation they use in their homes, whether or not they have an heat pump or an oil furnace, whether or not they encourage the government to adopt clean energy initiatives or coal-fired power plants. By adopting a price, it will drive societal change towards a reduction in carbon. It can't happen without a price. That is the tragedy of the commons. I'm sure the honourable member knows that, and he knows there are many carrots because we put billions of dollars into innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question et commentaire. L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Loire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et je remercie mon collègue pour son discours. Mais par contre, je pense que l'enjeu est important ici. On a plein de rapports au niveau environnemental, que ce soit de l'OCDE, que ce soit du commissaire à l'environnement, de Environnement Canada, qui dit que on n'est pas en voie d'atteindre nos objectifs. C'est sûr qu'en fait, non seulement on n'est pas en voie de les atteindre, c'est qu'il n'y a même pas de plan d'adaptation. On n'a même pas non plus de mesures de surveillance pour évaluer les progrès que le Canada effectue dans la diminution des gaz à effet de serre. Donc, sans plan, sans mesures d'adaptation, comment est-ce que... Puis surtout en soutenant à hauteur de 1,6 milliard de dollars en subventions pétrolières aux entreprises pétrolières, comment le gouvernement peut dire qu'il va atteindre ses objectifs? Il faut absolument qu'il y ait un plan au niveau des transports en commun, des infrastructures écologiques. Il n'y a pas ça, tout ça manque présentement. Donc, c'est sûr qu'on ne peut pas atteindre nos objectifs quand il n'y a pas de plan élaboré puis qu'on ne peut pas avoir de mesures de surveillance de nos progrès.
L'honorable député de St. John's East.
Merci. Je veux remercier le député de Salaberry-sur-Loire pour sa question. Je veux dire, premièrement, que nous avons un plan. Nous avons négocié avec toutes les provinces, territoires et gouvernements indigénaux un plan sur l'action climatique. Alors, à ce point-là, je veux lui seulement envoyer pour lire notre plan. Sur le prix eux-mêmes, comme j'ai expliqué dans mes discours, le prix eux-mêmes n'est pas assez élevé pour faire tout le travail. Il faut avoir d'autres options, d'autres critères, d'autres investissements pour assurer que nous allons atteindre notre bout de 2030 sur l'action climatique. Et à ce point-là, notre plan à augmentation, le prix sur le carbone, ça va seulement vers 2022. Et après ça, on peut Jurer si à quelle grandeur le prix doit être pour atteindre nos buts, c'est un bon plan. Merci.
Resuming